Great innovation stories make change possible. Each week on the Innovation Storytellers podcast, I invite innovation leaders to share how they overcame the obstacles to introduce breakthrough ideas to the world through the power of story. I'm featuring guests from Tesla, TD Ameritrade, Corning, Cisco, Bloomberg, and so many more. Listen in to learn how you can tell a more effective innovation story and change the future for the better. And I am over the moon would be an exaggeration about how I feel today, all puns intended, about having Dr. Chris Mattmann on with me. So let me just give you a little bit of a background. If you don't know who Chris is, you should, because he is the IT Chief Technology and Innovation Officer at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, amongst a whole host of other things. But you might also just call him Dad, right? Certainly another very important title in your life, Chris. But we probably know him most as the division manager of AI and analytics and innovative development organization in the IT and solutions directorate at NASA's JPL. He reports directly to the CIO and the director for IT at JPL and manages all of the advanced IT research and open source and tech evaluation and user infusion capabilities over at that lovely institution. Chris is also JPL's first principal scientist in the area of data science. And that designation of principal is awarded to recognize sustained and outstanding individual contributions in advanced scientific or technical knowledge and the advancement of implementation of technical and engineering practices on all of the projects and programs in the institution. So 20 years, Chris, of doing this incredible work at NASA's JPL. And I am just thrilled that you are with us today. Thank you so much for joining us.
And thanks for having me, Susan. And maybe instead of over the moon, we're over Mars. The background behind me.
Just swivel to the left a little bit so we can see those incredible. So those are the tracks of the Mars rover. For all of you listening on YouTube or watching on YouTube, the tracks of the Mars rover. That is the coolest wallpaper background for Zoom I have ever seen in my life. Amazing. What do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, well, this isn't the newer one. This is the Curiosity rover, MSL, from 2012. But, it is a very similar to the newest one, Perseverance. They're both about the size of a Volkswagen Bug. They're both one-ton devices that we've landed on the red planet, and that we had to invent basically a new type of what we call entry, descent, and landing system to drop one of those one-ton vehicles on the red planet. And so you can watch a YouTube video about it called 7 Minutes of Terror. Lots of interesting stuff happened, including literally a sky crane dropping this thing and retro rockets firing and all of these amazing things. But yeah, this is Curiosity, MSL, and those are its tracks. They're on the red planet. Yeah.
So for those of you who are listening, like on Apple Podcasts, I highly encourage you to check out the recording of this podcast on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, Innovation Storytellers, where you can actually see it for yourself. And we'll include that link for those 7 minutes in the show notes as well. Thank you. So, Chris, we start off the show every week with a question to our guest, which is, nobody majors in innovation. How the heck did you get to Mars? How the heck did you get there, Chris? How did you get to innovation work from your original studies? Because it sounds like this is the dream job of a lifetime for nerds like us who love all things space and who love all things innovation.
Yeah, Susan, everyone tells me that. And I have the best job in the world. I've been here for almost 20 years. And so 20 years ago, I basically started as an intern in college. So I'm in Santa Clarita, about an hour north here of Los Angeles. That's where Six Flags is, for those of you that don't live in California, but might have some marker that might indicate that for. So when I grew up in Santa Clarita, I grew up in a trailer. I tell people from the trailer to the PhD. So basically, I went to the University of Southern California on a bunch of scholarships. When I was an undergrad there, I was sitting up in the computer lab late one night, like folks used to do. I know now they just do it on YouTube or on their mobile devices or at home, actually, pandemic. But I was sitting in a lab, actually, with real people. I know that's strange. And there was a job posting for a bunch of earth scientists who were looking for, at the time, database programmers. And I was studying computer science. And I took the job. I started working on a project. I got the job at GPL. started working on a project in partnership with Caltech on databases. In the first 3 weeks, my project was cut due to budget, constraints. So they put me on something else. I mean, we work on the depth of work at NASA JPL is ridiculous. I mean, we're known as NASA's only national. So what that means is that all the government agencies, they have typically a lab that has civilians. So we're not civil servants or anything like that. It has civilians or non-government people working and doing important work for the government. And so to be a national lab, you've got to have these national priority interests that you're working on. So JPL has two. It's the Mars program. So we operate that for NASA and also for the nation. And for to date, up until only recently, we were the only nation that was successfully able to land rover on Mars. So China recently was able to do that with their Zhurong rover. But we managed the Mars program. And then we do the Deep Space Network. And so what that is, three 70-meter sized football stadium sized dishes in Madrid, Spain, Canberra, Australia, and in Goldstone, California. And that's basically the way that all countries today, even foreign partners, communicate with their assets in deep space. So send and receive messages from satellites, from rovers, and things like that. So 20 years ago, I got a job at that place. I was a computer scientist. My first 10 years, try and summarize this really quick. My first 10 years, I worked on a lot of Earth science and planetary missions, but in particular, because the world was changing at the time, everyone was becoming a sensor. Your iPhone had the first iPhone had an amazing camera in it, right? Even after that, everyone was able to take data. Well, science at the same time was evolving to be able to very voluminous amounts of imagery, sensors, other types of data. And so during that time, we moved from the era of after 10 years collecting 10 gigabytes of data, which is about 2 DVDs, to a mission that I helped pioneer that sort of set the standard for all other missions called the Orbiting Carbon Observatory, that in its first 3 months took 150 terabytes of data. So say on order of tens of thousands of DVDs just in the first 3 months and not after 10 years. And so I basically built the architecture, the systems, and the team that did all of those missions for about a decade. I became the chief architect in our instrument and science data systems organization. And after doing that, my second decade is very much like lots of founders and innovators' career. After doing that and being exhausted for doing it for 3 very pioneering missions and helping teach people how to do it after, I went into technology program development, looking for investments basically looking for government, private industry to invest in all of the innovations that we started to pioneer on these missions, but didn't have the funding to develop. So I built a almost $100 million program, Darpa, DHS, various cyber parts of the government, biopharmaceutical agencies, other places, journalists, data journalists, people that were working on the Panama Papers. And we built technology and invested in technology that not only could help all those diverse use cases from human trafficking to financial crimes to whatever, but all of it applied back to space. It was like data search, big data processing, technologies like that. So after doing that successfully, and the culmination of that was basically inventing the technology that was the reason that journalists were able to solve the Panama Papers and publish that and win the Pulitzer Prize in 2017. I spent the last 5 years basically learning how to build these sort of, I'll call them exponential organizations, and bringing diverse communities and people together and trying to deploy that in IT and bring innovators together across all walks of life, not just computer or data science or art, design, media, just bringing a lot of diverse people together and diverse creators to basically solve problems for space. So,
yeah, I mean, we have so many people who have been on the show during this COVID time who talk about, wow, it's really challenging managing remote teams and innovating across remote teams. And I'm listening to you just talking about the geographic breadth of the satellites and then going, oh, I'm sorry, that work from anywhere was actually taking place on Mars. We're talking about work from anywhere. We're dropping a 1-ton machine on the surface of Mars. That's working from anywhere, right? That's deploying remote teams to the most far-flung stretches of the universe. That's work from anywhere.
Yeah, lots of people talk about edge computing, and they're really talking about pushing the edge as far as they can in IoT, whether the edge is your fridge, your Tesla, your car, your whatever. Yeah. And here the edge is Mars, right? So, taking selfies on Mars, that's a, cool thing, but it's not the main purpose. Obviously, the main purpose is searching for life in the universe. But yeah, it's the edge for us is Mars and even further. Voyager 1 and 2 are in interstellar space. So there are 40-year-old explorers have been going since the 70s, right? And they're all the way, those twin basically explorers are in interstellar space. So that's the edge. I mean, the edge is wherever your mind can go, really. So.
Yeah. And your ability to build those things to take them there, which is just fantastic. I mean, I started off looking at everything through the lens of communication and the communication systems to actually simply reach. I suppose that's more on the, I don't even know to call it telecom anymore. That's what we would have called it in olden days. But the ability to create systems that are able to communicate with those devices, those endpoints, for lack of a better term, is phenomenally exciting. That just not only what that machine is capable of looking for, but that we're able to still communicate with it is amazing. And so I want to go back to some of the things that you started talking about, because it's a reminder to all of us. I loved how you framed that second 10 years of your 20 years at JPL, which is first 10 years is let's get these systems up. And that's a never ending process of innovating, right? Those missions to space, Hubble, Curiosity, and now the James Webb Space Telescope, that first half and into today, right? I mean, we just had news today about we're really at the precipice of the James Webb Space Telescope as being able to start collecting and sharing information back with us very soon, right? We're at those final end stages of getting everything ready. Can you talk to us about what the innovation process looks like inside of NASA? Like that, because we have conversations on the corporate side about, are we iterating? Are we moonshotting? I mean, you guys are moonshotting. You guys are Mars shooting, like how does NASA develop its innovation portfolio to keep pushing the envelope and keep taking us further or deeper into the places that we are now?
Yeah. Well, so structurally, NASA is 9 centers throughout the U.S. And typically they have their different, some years ago, they did an activity in which they tried to identify sort of center level responsibilities and authorities, especially they've done it for a while. Lots of people know Ames is really good at computer science. It's in Silicon Valley. They also do a lot with airplanes and basically terrestrial flight and instrumentation. Lots, maybe people don't know, but within the context of NASA and the government, Goddard typically does a lot of earth science. They do planetary. They have big climate models that they run there.
Wait, so if you could just clarify for us, because we have some international listeners as well. So Ames
is... got it. So NASA Ames is in Silicon Valley. That's one of the NASA centers. Their typical expertise, like I said, is in computer science. They're really close proximity to Northern California, and the Bay Area puts them right in the center of Silicon Valley. So they tend to get a lot of innovation in computer science, IT, technology, things like that. NASA Goddard Space Flight Center is in Maryland, right by the Beltway, right by the University of Maryland College Park. And so their expertise is in climate modeling. They do Earth planetary missions and so on and so forth. Neither of them, those two that I talked about, do a lot with, say, human exploration, because that typically happens at Kennedy Space Center, the one in Florida that you see launches from, KSC, or Johnson Space Center, the Houston, if you've heard, mission control and all of that. And so typically it breaks down at NASA into the Science Mission Directorate from headquarters, human exploration, HEOMD, and so forth. And that's where a lot of the comes from. There was a lunar, program director. So not only does it break down in terms of discipline and then center level responsibility and authority. And like I mentioned earlier, JPL's big focus and expertise is on robotic exploration of space. So a lot of people say, oh, how's it going with Elon and all that? And I tell people, well, I can read about it in the papers too and things like that, but we don't do a ton of work in that. We're focused program. And to your point, Susan, I still call it telecom too. We just say deep space telecom and things like that, the institutional interplanetary infrastructure to communicate in space. Those are our focuses. So once you sort of understand that roadmap of NASA and center level disciplines and authorities and what they're supposed to be working on, if you go back to what I was talking about, JPL is NASA's only national lab. And if your national labs work on national priority things, and they're supposed to also do first of a kind things. So if something is routine for us, private industry should do it. And we should immediately, as soon as possible, transfer it, to private industry. So if you look at other areas of the government, the Department of Energy, the DOE, the military, the DoD in the US, DOE has a dozen national labs, Brookhaven, Argonne National Lab. They have Lawrence Berkeley Lab, and so a dozen of them in DOE. In DoD, there's MITRE, MIT Lincoln Labs, Draper. There's a number of them as well. There's one in NASA. And so the reason I'm couching that is that JPL is really, and NASA folks at the top level in the headquarters would tell you this, is really the hub of innovation as by our authorities since we formed as a government agency for NASA. And so how do we do it? JPL has one of the only back of a napkin sketch, like we like to say, all the way to conceptual, costed design, proposal submitted, and $2.5 billion Mars rover over a decade built, end-to-end pipeline. And we call that the Innovation Foundry. So JPL has this amazing international world level asset called the Foundry, in which we do several things. We have an element in it called the A-Team. This is where we bring people together, bring in artists from LACMA, movie producers, we bring in scientists, engineers, everybody. And we say, what does 50 years out look like? If there's a, fully autonomous robotic mission, what would it look like? And they do visioning exercises. They envision what it looks like. They iterate. They do everything that you're talking about. We used to do it in person, but now we do it online. But we hold multi-day meetings, arriving at a conceptual or set of conceptual candidate designs. The next step is Team X. Team X takes those designs and they apply. We know a lot about our costing. We know a lot about what specific subsystems and mission organizations cost. If it's autonomous rover that has to land on Mars, if it's a satellite, if it's a CubeSat, we have a lot of data on how that's costed and how you would actually bring, like actual numbers to that in a proposal, or how you would, break that down in terms of work level and work breakdown structure. So the purpose of Team X is to take those candidate designs, take them through that process and produce a real final actual costed mission design. And so we get, if you look at our budget in the last few years, it's averaged around $2.7 billion of directed funds, just JPL. NASA itself is anywhere between 18 to $20 billion, which if you, think that's a lot of money, and it is, it's, 0.001 of the actual GDP. So it's a lot of money, but, if they were actually investing in it, the government could invest more. But so NASA gets 20 billion, JPL gets 2.7 billion. So we get that directed money, but we still have to compete because not all of our missions and budget are directed. So we have to write a proposal, say, for this mission, or partner with other organizations to do that. And so that whole process is sort of, you think it's the end of our formulation, but we even apply data-driven practices. Hey, we got the proposal back. It didn't win or something. We take it through our iterative feedback process and we're analyzing. We actually use AI and NLP to analyze our proposals, to see what the strengths and weaknesses are, so that when we submit better proposals the next time, they're better candidates to actually do it. So it really is a almost closed and an open loop process. We're learning from ways, that were successful in the past to write better proposals. So
wait, I want to stop
JPL
you there.
does.
I want to know how I could get on like that team with the LACMA Hollywood people in order to tell better stories around what the future of space looks like. Number one, how does one apply to get on that incredible team? And number two is I'm really encouraged by hearing about this natural language processing and AI as part and parcel of the process of creating proposals, which it's a question for so many of us on this who are listening, is how many of us have really looked at the proposals that we're writing, the stories that we're telling to our senior executives, to think about how we're managing the information flow to them and making them better every single time. I think that's a phenomenal suggestion. So maybe we can dive a little bit more into that.
Yeah. So basically, how do you get on the team, Susan? So, basically you get on the team by basically making yourself available, and we can get you on the team. It's much easier nowadays because we're not doing this in person, even though a small set of people are going to JPL typically for touch labor during these times. We've moved some of these innovation or Imagineering sessions online. And basically it's really driven by skills and expertise, and kind of like my answer to your second question, which is how many organizations, and I think this is really for your audience, are using their own, technologies to sort of drive better storytelling. We actually are even using AI and NLP to drive the selection of our subject matter experts that participate in these Imagineering sort of sessions, publishing a lot in power models. And we have a session where we really need to understand how we're going to use a new type of battery or RTG type of system to power a future rover. You're going to get a call probably more than likely because we've seen your publications and we think you should come in and be part of it. If you've been innovating in entry, descent, and landing or partnering a lot with folks at JPL, we know, and our systems know, because we've been turning them inwards to really focus on that. So we've been trying to really increase our data-driven sort of decision-making and improving our formulation process.
Wow, just phenomenal. And so is there competition internally within JPL when you have projects? And I imagine there are staunch advocates. People feel really passionately about that next cool new thing. And you're dealing with taxpayer dollars, right? So there's only so much money to go around to fund each project. What is that like what's the win like? And what's it like when yours is not making the funding selection criteria this time around?
Yeah. Well, I've been on both sides of that, and it's definitely highs and lows in my career as an individual contributor before it kind of moved into management. And yeah, absolutely. And so I want to kind of be clear. So JPL does get a number of directed dollars. So those are dollars from the government that we don't have to compete for. But as an FFRDC, federally funded research and development center, or analogously national lab, as I've been using to term it, it's a good thing. And they typically do want some level of competed research, both externally, but also internally amongst its innovators and things like that. And so we do have processes inside in which people go through JPL's matrix organization. So they go through their line organization, which are who holds the resources and the people and the programs and the projects to prioritize what types of, proposals they're writing, whether they fit a technology roadmap NASA or our sponsors are interested in, and things like that. And so that's sort of some of the ways that some of those decisions are made. It doesn't make it any better when you don't win, but I just want to be clear. If you don't win, it's not like you don't have a job and things like that, because we do have this sort of set of directed work that we work on, and people are funded to kind of do that. But this does drive the entrepreneurial spirit, which is exactly the intent of national labs and what they want.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. So, I can only imagine the joy and the adulation of getting the yes. And we're going to wait till next year on that, right? Because everything feels so critical and important when you're in the business of discovery. So the other half, as you described, is that second 10 years where it's time to kind of turn around and say, okay, how can I share this? How can I expand this? As innovators, we're looking for ways to expand our spheres of influence with the innovation process that we know, and to bring in more creative minds, we hope, right, that can use the skills and tools that we've developed in those first 10 years. And I hear this a lot on the show. And oftentimes in the corporate sphere, it's, well, what about startups? And figuring out ways to create accelerator programs, corporate acceleration, all different kinds of ways of using that. But I heard you talk about things like social movements and all different spheres, even down to Pulitzer Prize winning journalism. I was enthralled by the Panama Papers and what they were able to uncover. It never dawned on me. I heard journalists were collaborating all over the world. And I'm thinking back to all the president's men of reporters on telephones and payphones sticking quarters. But you're talking about developing highly sophisticated database mechanisms and communication mechanisms where journalists from all over the world can share and go through reams of data in order to get to that output. Can you just briefly summarize that shift from being a data scientist at NASA to helping amazing journalists around the world to get to the heart of corruption and fraud?
Yeah. And part of it just mirrors sort of the evolution that I was talking about in sort of the first 10 years. So just like everyone had an iPhone and became a sensor, and all of a sudden people and social media companies, the government, everyone knew externally, the general public, but a lot of business people realized, and there were papers written about this, that the shift was going to be from closed loop corporate-based systems in which people hold on to their data and IP to really data mashups, taking these sensors and doing the whole Amazon knows you're pregnant before your mother does type of thing, based on what you're buying and your sensor history and all of that.
And your search. Yep.
And your search. Mm-hmm. And so similarly, journalists And still today, there are reams of paper, more so actually than us digital transformation wonks would like. But, there's things like that. But yeah, it became too much for journalists too. And you can think about this if you've seen the movie Zero Dark 30 even, or if you've seen the Netflix film by Alex Winter on the Panama Papers. When data leaks or dumps, or you just basically raided a terrorist, the biggest terrorist in the world, and got a bunch of their computers and drives and stuff, and you have limited time in which you kind of need to go through that tranche of those terabytes of information, you need technology basically to do it. And the basic technology that I invented that was very useful for NASA as well, because they have tons of data, and just any science research institution has the same thing. What you're looking for in that data are people, places, things, connections, and connections between them, and organizations and other things. And so that is true also, by the way, of science data, where you're looking for observations, instruments, phenomenon, and relationships between them. It's just sort of a different taxonomy or hierarchy and stuff for it. But yeah, basically, the tech I invented was called Pika. It came out of a lot of work that I had done in open source. I got involved. It was on the Apache board, a lot of investment from NASA, other areas of the government, including Darpa, private industry. And yeah, we built out this technology. And what happened was, because we made it open source, journalists found it, picked up on it, and they said, hey, this is a good thing I got all this data leaks from Monseca, which was this holding company that said how people created shell corporations. And what if we ran it through this technology, and what sort of came out the other end was, here are all the people that are referenced in this big data leak data set. Here are all of their connections. Here's all the money. Here's all the places that it's at. And that's basically what you needed then to write a big story about it and analyze and basically find out the Prime Minister of Iceland was hiding money, or this and that, or other people. And so it was really a technology accelerator. That type of work would have taken decades with reams of paper before. So.
Yeah, because previously it was newspaper clippings and a lot of red yarn. I don't know why that was the connector for everything in the past, but that's my mental image of you kind of turning that bulletin board with red yarn and lots of pictures and newspaper clippings into what's a highly usable, highly functional database that people continue to add on to, right? I mean, like, this research is not.
No. Yeah. So you might have heard about the Paradise Papers, and more recently, the Pandora Papers from the Washington Post. But with the increase, and I'm not speaking to the origins of the data or anything, whether they're just or leaking or hacking places are just, but the data's out there. And so when people get it, they need ways of kind of quickly sifting and sorting through it, and it'll continue to be used. And it really is, the fact that I love is many of the people that come to talk to me about the technology today, more so, are journalists than scientists and things like that. They're clearly using it, and there'll invariably be more uses of it, and for good. Shining a light on things ends up being for good. So
that's right. So I feel like I have so many questions to ask you, Chris. What is this endless search we have for life elsewhere? We've got a lot of life right here. I'm sure you get this question all the time, but what is it about us as humans that make us go, but maybe there's carbon somewhere else in the far-flung reaches of the galaxy? And wouldn't it be nice to find a little Wally, a little ET, a little something out there that might make a human connection for us with something out there? What is that for us, Chris? Why is that there for all of us?
There's definitely the spark of, how did we get here? Why are we here? Not just why are we on Earth, but why do we exist in the universe? But the thing I'll tell people, and I'll divert the question a little bit, every dollar spent in space comes back fivefold on Earth. And I'll just illustrate that. That iPhone camera, and its evolution, really, if you look over the last 15 years, was like, first, the initial technology, the CMOS technology for that camera came from space. Actually, it's a Caltech patent. And so that's something everyone uses. Is it like, imagine your life without your iPhone. You can't today, or your phone and things like that. So this fundamentally game-changing thing that you use only came because of investments in space. Think about regenerative food or different types of now sustainable food. A lot of the research dollars from that came from space, believe it or not, and astronauts and other things like that. So in this pursuit of something, whether or not, and I tell people it's a religion, everything is sort of a leap of faith. You either care about it or you don't. I'm not going to pass judgment on it. I personally am an explorer, and I'm very interested in where we came from, but I totally get the argument, hey, Earth matters. Well, the thing I tell people is NASA's planetary science, but guess what? Earth's the planet. So we do tons of work too that definitely observe our own planet and try and make it better and things like that. But the thing I tell them is, don't get too hung up too if we're not doing things in Earth, or if we're exploring Mars, because again, those dollars come back in space. And I can point to, I won't spend the rest of this program doing it, but I can point to dozens of examples in your daily life that came from those explorations of Mars and interstellar space.
I saw on LinkedIn one of our previous guests, Steve Rader, who does a lot of work in open innovation with NASA. And he had posted that they were looking for food producers who were going to create the next, help us feed the astronauts who are going up next. What are your amazing ideas for food? It struck me that I haven't really contemplated NASA's astronaut food sources since we all tried freeze-dried ice cream when we were in the 7th grade or something like that. And so is there one example of that where you think, as you look at what space travel has done I'm hoping things have gotten much better than freeze-dried ice cream for the folks out of the orbit here?
Yeah, absolutely. So NASA has advanced a lot in 3D printing tech. A lot of the 3D printing, I'll give you a non-food example, but then I'll relate it to food and where people are going with it. So in 2014, the rover that generated the tracks behind me, Mars Science Laboratory Curiosity, happened to notice on Mars that were Mars asteroids. So there are asteroids on every planet. And so it happened to notice, hey, these are a couple of rocks, look like an asteroid. Obviously, we couldn't beam that asteroid back in 2014. We can't do it today, but even in 2014, we could do it even less. But what we could do is we took imagery from the rovers and beamed it back to Earth, basically stereo imagery of it. So multi-camera imagery of those meteors on Mars. And we printed it using a 3D printer here on Earth and printed it at color scale. It's sitting in the director's office of JPL, even the current one still. And he held it, he touched it, he looked at it, he held it at size and scale. We literally beamed those Martian rocks back. And so that was a predecessor to basically modern thoughts and approaches to some of these food elements. We accelerated 3D printing technology, definitely. And I don't know if you saw recently in the last week, one very interesting thing, and it's not there yet. I wouldn't recommend going to a Michelin 5-star restaurant to do this with 3D printed, say, pork. But there are some advancements, and you might have seen this in the last week or two. There's 3D printed pork, and there's other materials that they're using. And I think the future of sort of regenerative and also 3D printed, more sustainable food has been significantly accelerated and will continue to be by programs like that. So.
And I'm sure we'll find a way to bread it, deep fry it, and make it unhealthy all in the process, right? We'll take that brand new thing that we've created that's going to make us all healthier, and it'll show up at a county fair and it'll go sideways one more time.
100%. I wouldn't, and I'll be there probably eating it less than I used to, but I still have to probably partake in my deep fried pork, or whatever, regenerative pork. So
I had French fries twice in one day. I can't do that anymore. That's not a wise thing to do anymore. So moving on from, I would be remiss in not asking you about things related to Darpa, which is a constant source of controversy, question marks, conspiracy theories, 1,000 things that surround Darpa. But can you give us a status of, does Darpa still exist in some iteration today, or have we succumbed to the full total commercial internet as it exists? How does that work today?
Yeah, DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, it has been in lore in the government and commercial world forever. It does still exist. It's a model for really, I would say, innovation and entrepreneurship within the government. It receives on order of about $5 billion of investments. They, unlike NASA, don't have tens of thousands of a civil servant workforce or other government agencies. DARPA's thinner. It typically has about 400 PMs, and they need to get out of there in 5 to 6 years. They don't want them to stay. So there's a constant rotation in and out, and there's a reason for that. They do have institutional memory. That's typically with the program advisors, which they call CETAs, which typically are contractors. But the actual program managers at DARPA, they want the people in the last 3 to 5 years and to constantly bring these new ideas. They take that $5 billion or whatever they get. Haven't looked at the latest numbers. They get it out to universities, industry, other national labs, other parts of the government, really to accelerate things. And DARPA's mission as the warfighter and other things and defense, but just in terms of things they've helped create, they helped create Siri, your modern digital assistant that you can't live without. They helped create the internet, as you mentioned. But yeah, they do a lot of good for the world in their mission of supporting the warfighting, controversial, whether you support that or not, but they have been a model agency, I would say, for lots of really game-changing innovation, and even for new initiatives by the administration. You saw that maybe they're trying to create a climate DARPA and things like that, really to move the needle, to follow that model and things like that. And there's an energy ARPA, there's an ARPA-E, there's other ARPA type of models, which are Advanced Research Project Agency. And so I'm actually a big fan of it. During my time partnering with them for nearly a decade, some of the things we did is help stop human trafficking. So I don't know if you saw the Super Bowl. There's a lot of stuff going around in LA now about awareness for human trafficking. A lot of human trafficking happens during these big, large events and other things. Well, we help basically, you can go back and look, but in 2013, 2014, they were able to intervene in a number and prosecute a number of really bad people that were doing human trafficking way back then. And it was directly from contributions for 400 plus arrests, people that over the years, like we basically helped take down human trafficking with the work that we were doing, the early parts of it back then. So they've done a lot of good for the world as well. And I continue to believe in the model. And I was very lucky to work with Darpa when I did.
Phenomenal. I think about how that often appears to us to exist on a very micro level, those interactions. And yet the reality of human trafficking is that it is a global criminal enterprise. And so you actually need the span and the scope of a global body in order to attack that. And I say that just in my own experience of working in tiny little brothels in northern Thailand doing AIDS education with sex workers and their customers 30 years ago. The problem feels very local, but the truth of it is we know it to be massively global.
100%.
So I know that we're pressed for time today. And so I want to make sure that I get in 3 important hot seat questions for you, Chris, because out of all the chief innovation officers I could have on this show, you have a purview that is interstellar and that is beyond global. It is universal. And so I'll ask you the question I ask all of my guests: if you could be on any innovation team around the world at any time in history, which team would you have liked to have joined or would like to join?
I'm a big fan of the history in the 40s and World War II and things like that. It had to be the code breakers. Yeah, would love to have been on that. So,
the U.S. code breakers, or would you be in the UK, or would you be in
any of them? Yeah, great point. Any of them. Yeah, any of them. They all made very interesting and different contributions to cryptography and other things. They've been the code breakers, I think.
Fantastic. Greatest innovation of all time, and you can choose a couple if you want to, but in your mind, what do you think? Greatest innovation of all?
For me, it's got to be, it's funny you mentioned DARPA, but it's got to be their contributions to the internet. And obviously it wasn't just DARPA, it was this big international conglomerate of everyone with ARPANET and things like that. But it was the internet. I mean, the basis of Web 1, Web 1.5, which was the internet of commerce, and Web 2, which was social media, and even web and crypto was that internet that we use. It's just a fundamental utility and a resource. And yeah, to me, it's that. Any
innovation that you would love to see, that you like, some annoyance even in your life that you're like, God, someone needs to invent that. What is that thing that you would love to see created that you have not seen?
I've seen the early parts of it, and I know we're close, and I think the needle can move a little bit closer. It's got to be flying cars. And I know that the ones that look like drones are being tested in the Middle East and UAE and stuff like that. But, the sooner those arrive, the better. And it's sort of a tie. This isn't fair, but I'll give you 2 answers. Then Iron Man. I would love a real Iron Man suit. I would love a real one. Yeah.
You're like, screw private travel, screw commercial travel. I just want to be a superhero.
I'm a big Marvel fan. I love Robert Downey Jr. It's definitely an Iron Man suit.
Oh, fantastic. Those are super answers. Chris, I cannot thank you enough for being on the show today. How can people get in touch with you if they want to learn more about what you do, find out about all the incredible work of JPL? Where should we direct them?
So I have a website. It's Mattmann, Mattmann.ai. And then probably on social, it's Instagram, just Chris Mattmann. So you can get all the links from the website for that.
Fantastic. And I can't thank you enough for being on the show today. And I will absolutely hold you to being on one of that storytelling team for the next go round. It would be amazing to do that kind of work.
It would be our pleasure, Susan. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Chris. Have a good one.
You too.
Now you might be asking, Susan, why innovation storytelling? Well, the truth is that an innovation story told well not only breaks down communication barriers so you can drive change and new growth, but it also helps other people remember and champion your work. And it propels your best ideas forward faster to secure you the runway, resources, and recognition you so richly deserve. In other words, stories are memory-making devices that significantly reduce the time it takes for you and your innovation to be understood. But like many leaders, you probably never got the memo that storytelling skills would be central to your success. Well, I've got some good news for you. It's not too late because I've got you covered. Whether you need an expert to come and speak to your innovation leaders, you need training in the art and method of innovation storytelling, or you just need the support and guidance of a consultant who can get you where you want to go in less time, visit www.susanlinder.com today to learn more and to set up a call to discuss your needs. I'm so looking forward to connecting with you and to helping you tell a great innovation story. If you liked what you heard so far, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another episode. And leave us a comment. Tell us what you think of this episode. We'd love to hear from you. And if you didn't like what you've heard, just forget everything I've said.